It was a peaceful morning in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun spilled across well-kept lawns and mailboxes lined like soldiers on duty. Marcus, a calm and hard-working man in his 40s, was sipping coffee on his porch, appreciating the new beginning of the day. He had recently purchased this house after years of saving and sacrifice, a dream finally realized. But as he looked out at the peaceful street, he had no idea that his patience and dignity were about to be tested by prejudice hidden behind a friendly smile. Moments later, Karen, his next-door neighbor, appeared. She was known for her controlling attitude, always commenting on everyone's lawns, mailboxes, and parking habits. When she saw Marcus, her brows furrowed. Instead of greeting him, she asked sharply, "Are you renting this place?" Marcus smiled politely, explaining it was his house. But Karen wasn't convinced. To her, he didn't look like someone who owned property there. Her words carried the weight of assumption and ignorance. Marcus stayed calm, responding with respect and grace. But inside, a storm began to build, a mix of hurt and disappointment. What Karen didn't know was that her judgmental words would soon become a lesson she'd never forget. The next day, Karen knocked on Marcus's door with papers in her hand. "Hi," she said with a forced smile, "since you're renting, you'll need to pay the community maintenance fee." Marcus was stunned. "I think you're mistaken," he replied kindly, "I'm the homeowner." Karen laughed awkwardly. "No, I spoke with the HOA. You must be the tenant. We've had issues before." Marcus calmly took out his property deed, showing his name clearly printed on it. Karen froze for a second but quickly regained her composure. "Oh, that's unusual," she muttered. "I'll double-check." When she left, Marcus sighed. He didn't want a conflict, he only wanted peace. But sometimes silence feeds ignorance. Later that evening, he decided he would face the situation with intelligence, not anger. He began collecting documentation and emails, ready to defend his right with truth and dignity. Days passed, and gossip began spreading around the neighborhood. Some people whispered that Marcus was lying about owning his house. Others ignored him completely. He greeted everyone with the same gentle smile, refusing to let bitterness take root. Karen, however, wasn't done. She called the HOA chairperson, claiming Marcus was illegally staying there. When the HOA scheduled a verification visit, Marcus welcomed them with warmth. He offered them coffee, presented all the documents again, and remained composed. When the truth became undeniable, embarrassment swept across the committee. The chairperson apologized for the misunderstanding. But Karen couldn't accept defeat. "There must be a mistake," she insisted, her voice trembling with frustration. Marcus didn't argue. Instead, he said softly, "Sometimes, the mistake isn't on paper, it's in the way we see people." His words hung in the air like a mirror reflecting her actions. That night, Karen sat in silence, replaying his words in her mind. She wasn't used to being questioned, but something about Marcus's calmness made her uncomfortable. For the first time, she began to reflect, not on him, but on herself. Meanwhile, Marcus continued living peacefully, helping neighbors, mowing lawns, greeting kids walking home from school. His quiet kindness began to shift opinions. People started noticing the contrast, one man's dignity outshining another's judgment. One evening, a neighbor thanked Marcus for fixing a broken fence post that wasn't even his. "You didn't have to do that," they said. He smiled, replying, "Sometimes, doing what's right doesn't need a reason." The moment was simple, but it carried power, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Karen's pride battled her guilt. She couldn't sleep, haunted by her own unfair behavior. She remembered how quickly she had assumed the worst about someone she didn't even know. Wanting to fix it, she baked a pie and walked over to Marcus's house. Her heart pounded as she knocked. Marcus opened the door, surprised to see her holding the pie. "I came to apologize," she said, her voice trembling. "I judged you unfairly. That wasn't right." Marcus looked at her for a moment, then smiled gently. "It takes strength to admit that. I appreciate it." He invited her inside. They spoke for a while, not about property or rules, but about life, struggle, and respect. For the first time, Karen listened with an open heart. Over time, a quiet friendship grew between them. Karen began to understand how her assumptions had blinded her, not just about Marcus, but about many others she'd misjudged. Marcus, patient as always, never brought up the past to shame her. Instead, he led by example. When the next HOA meeting took place, Karen stood before the group and confessed her mistake. "I misjudged my neighbor," she said. "And in doing so, I realized the importance of humility." The room fell silent. Marcus simply nodded from his seat. The lesson had been learned, not through anger, but through grace. Weeks later, the neighborhood felt different. Conversations were warmer, smiles lasted longer, and people began seeing each other beyond color, status, or assumptions. One afternoon, as Marcus tended to his garden, Karen waved from across the street. "Need any help?" she called. Marcus chuckled softly. "I think I'm good, but thanks, Karen." They both laughed, a moment that showed how far they'd come. The narrator's voice softens. Sometimes, change doesn't start with a fight. It begins with a moment of truth, a word of kindness, and the courage to see people for who they truly are. And as the camera pans out from the quiet neighborhood, the final message lingers. Respect isn't earned through power, it's built through understanding.